Good afternoon. Forecast calls for sunny skies today, a high near 80, and then a chance of showers this evening, low near 64. Showers likely on Saturday, possibly a thunderstorm as well, a high near 75. You're listening to 90.5 FM WESA, Pittsburgh's listener-supported NPR news station.
Hey, it's John Mello, the host of Wits, a new show with comedy, conversation, songs, and surprises, recorded live at the Fitzgerald Theater in St. Paul. This week, comedian and actor Patton Oswalt,
let me melt in your mouth,
and singer-songwriter Ben Lee.
My head is a box filled with nothing, that's the way I like it.
Tonight at 8 on 90.5 WESA.
You're listening to Essential Pittsburgh, 90.5 WESA, Pittsburgh's NPR news station. You can find podcasts of this show and a lot more at WESA.FM. Up next, at 1 o'clock, it's Here and Now, a collaboration of NPR and WBUR Boston.
For more than 20 years, the Allegheny Front has been reporting on environmental news in your region. I'm your host, Jennifer Shveta-Jordan. Join me and our team of award-winning journalists every week to meet the people and see the places behind environmental headlines. The Allegheny Front airs on 90.5 WESA, Saturday mornings at 7:30.
It's Essential Pittsburgh. I'm Paul Guggenheimer. Since the economic downturn began in 2008, city farming has gone from an offbeat, do-it-yourself source for cheap groceries to a way to engage whole communities in the farming process and improve nutrition for people living in food deserts. The city of Pittsburgh is home to some interesting agricultural projects at both small and large-scale levels. The possibilities for those wanting to farm in the city are pretty broad, and it helps to know where to start. Heather Mikulas is a program manager in local food infrastructure and agricultural entrepreneurship for the Penn State University Extension Office in Allegheny County. She helps backyard farmers in Pittsburgh develop their agricultural ideas, and she joins us now in Studio A for a look at city farming and ways you can farm in Pittsburgh. Heather Mikulas, welcome to Essential Pittsburgh.
Thanks for having me, and I'm happy to be here.
And you can join the conversation by calling 412-246-2002. That's 412-246-2002. Our email address is esspgh@wesa.fm, and you can reach us on Twitter at #EPLive. Do you consider yourself an urban farmer, or do you live in the city and have livestock? If so, what are the benefits for you, and have you considered becoming an urban farmer but don't know how and where to start? We'll take your comments and your questions again at 412-246-2002. That's 412-246-2002. Heather Mikulas, first of all, what is urban agriculture? What does it entail?
Urban agriculture can be any activities that you would think of from a traditional agricultural perspective, but scaled down to fit into the city. So this can be anything from apartment dwellers, only with a balcony, who would put together a container garden, maybe one of those upside-down tomato hanging bags that they would grow some cherry tomatoes from, all the way up to community-level projects of cobbling together several vacant lots for larger agricultural activities. And sometimes people like to have chickens, bees, and I get lots of questions about goats.
Chickens, bees, and goats, those seem to be the three that come up the most.
They do.
So what do you think people that, why do you think that we've seen this trend of going back to a simple, domesticated type of lifestyle? Is it just about saving money on groceries, or is it more than that?
It's a lot more than that, and people's reasons for doing this work are different. Some people grew up with immigrant gardens. Pittsburghers are very, very proud of their immigrant history. And so, for instance, in my family, I got into gardening and agriculture because my Italian grandparents converted their whole entire yard into a garden, and we would can every August. And so some people do that for nostalgia for their families. Other people do it for practical reasons. I think there's a lot of do-it-yourself motivation as well, just for similar reasons like why has knitting become popular again in the last 5 or 10 years. People really want to have a direct connection to the earth, a tactile hobby, get some exercise and fresh air. And that really speaks to the home gardener, large-size garden. And also, a lot of people who do urban ag on a larger scale, for instance, the revitalization of vacant lots, are doing it through a community development or economic generating lens. And so that can have very altruistic community building components to it.
And is part of it, and you touched a little bit on this in the answer you just gave, but is part of it just this idea that we spend so much of our time working or focusing on other stuff that we don't even think about where our food comes from, and in many cases don't care. You if you want to eating healthy means you go to the grocery store and you buy lean cuisine, and it has all sorts of preservatives and probably a lot of sodium in it, and you nuke that thing up, and you don't think about where it comes from or maybe even how it tastes. It's just, you just accept it and you move on, and it's not an integral part of your life. Is this about reconnecting with not only nature, but just sort of thinking about and appreciating the process of growing food and feeding yourself, really feeding yourself well?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because have you ever eaten a lean cuisine and then felt satisfied afterwards?
Never.
No offense to lean cuisine.
And I eat them all the time, but it's like, did I eat? Am I happy here with this?
Right. I think that anytime I've eaten something like that, I'm immediately thinking about my next meal and what else I can eat that day. So that is sort of a point A to B product. So I think that whenever people are working with gardening and producing their own foods, you do have a health, nutrition, wellness piece to it. There's also a food access part about where can you find food, especially if you're living in a neighborhood that might not have access to a grocery store. But then there's also the whole cult of celebrity chefs and the Food Network. And you can't turn on a television, radio, or open a magazine really without seeing something speaking to delicious food. And I think that the gardening and the home processing is a way that a lot of people bring that part of their lifestyle directly in touch and in control of it. And a lot of times the gardening is just the first step, and it can be really fun and interesting then to freeze or can or process. And it's just a creative space for a lot of homeowners and apartment dwellers to garden and make some food products and then have great dinner parties from it.
We're talking with Heather Mikulus about city farming, or urban agriculture, if you will, and we will invite you to join the conversation at 412-246-2002. Let's go to Kevin on the south side, not far from where we are here in our 90.5 WESA studios. Kevin, welcome to Essential Pittsburgh.
Hi.
Hello, you're on, and go ahead with your comment or question.
Okay. Well, I have a house on the south side slope, which is pretty steep and just unbelievably overgrown with vines, poison ivy. I mean, like grapevines that are thick as your wrist. And I wanted to figure out some way to clear it, preferably and then turn it into some sort of fertilizer, or some way to recycle all that dead plant material and then grow something in there. I was wondering if you had any ideas of what would be a good way about possibly rejuvenating the soil and then being able to turn this backyard into a garden.
That's a great question.
That is an excellent question. So how much space are you working with, Kevin?
I would say 30 square feet.
Okay, that is a lot less intimidating than if you were going to tell me that you were doing half of Mount Washington. So I think that in your case with 30 square feet, a machete is going to be your best friend. And I hate to say it, but with our slopes and the type of vegetation that is up there, I would recommend being very careful with composting it for a couple of reasons. One reason is because that material is so fibrous and full of ligament, sort of the plant lignin, that it will not break down for several years. And so if you're able to remove the leaves, you can chop that up finely, compost that. But as far as the thick vines and stems, that will take several years to break down. So I suggest just removing that and taking it to one of the city of Pittsburgh's recycling centers. There's one in Homewood, and so in North Point Breeze. And so that would be a great way to do it. And then following clearing, I suggest doing the soil remediation maybe through sowing some cover crops and letting those take the space of the weeds that might want to grow next year, and then cutting that down and working it into your soil. So I'd say, remove what's there, do some great cover cropping, and start building your soil.
All right, thank you. I'll do that.
Good luck, Kevin. Something you said to him made me wonder. Several years to break down vines and stems, and why years? Can't you just dig underneath them and just how deep are they? How rooted are they into the earth?
Well, if you're dealing with a lot of our invasive species that we have growing in Pittsburgh, you're going to run into grapevines, naturalized noxious plants like poison ivy. Knotweed is a terrible invasive problem, and so these plants are really, really atrocious to try and remove.
Why?
Just because their biology is such that they are pioneer species, and what that means is that they can grow on really marginalized soil and properties, and they are so voracious in their growth habits that they will easily take over any type of land or other growing space that, say, a native or an intentionally cultivated vegetable plant would grow. Then the other piece of
what do you do to remove them? You said that you mentioned getting out the machete, which sounds like fun, but that's only going to go so far. So you just have to kill them and wait for. Why are you waiting a couple of years just for them to?
No. I'm sorry. So you would have to wait a couple of years for the viney plants to compost. That's why I suggested just take them off-site to an off-site composter.
Gotcha. Okay.
No, just get the plants out with a shovel, a machete, your friends, and then go ahead and start planting cover crops this year over winter. So when spring comes, you have a soil-building crop in place. So those old noxious weeds won't generate. Right.
Okay.
And then plant next year.
And people, you mentioned, people should be careful. We talked about poison ivy recently on this show and how global warming is creating a proliferation of it, and that it doesn't take much to just brush up against poison ivy, and then you're dealing with maybe a really horrible rash. So you have to be. Are there any particular precautions people should take?
Just cover yourself. So wear long sleeve pants, boots, shirts, and then also remember that the oil, it's something called Urish oil on the poison ivy plant that rubs off, and so it will stay on your clothing and your tools active up for a year. So if you touch that shovel without cleaning it in January, you could look at another case of poison ivy if you are allergic to it. So you just want to make sure you clean everything
Wash your clothes
really
right
well.
away.
Yep, dish detergent, something like Dawn dish detergent can really help to take it out and break up the oil.
Okay, well that is good advice. So can I just let's say that maybe I have a few weeds or whatever around, but can I just plow up my front yard this weekend or start tilling a vacant lot? What does it take to start an urban farm, especially when in the city? A vacant lot, you're looking at maybe some cement, you're looking at leftover, maybe metallic substances. So what about removing that stuff?
Sure. So we'll speak to that stuff first, because we
Okay.
do have a lot of that stuff in Pittsburgh. And for instance, whenever I first met a woman named Wendy Schwartz, who's the owner of Garden Dreams in Wilkinsburg, she had bought several contiguous vacant lots with abandoned buildings in Wilkinsburg, and she looked me up and down and said, "Do you know how to use a jackhammer?" And I was just fresh out of graduate school, and I'm like, what am I getting myself into? It's very different than in the countryside.
Yeah, the Penn State Extension Office doesn't maybe have any jackhammers available to loan out.
Right. So in that situation, if you are dealing with vacant lots where there have been pre-existing buildings and there are things like cement, rubble, glass, metal, those things can oftentimes take the bigger resources that an individual could have, and at that point it would be smart to connect with the city through a program called Green Up, where they will assist with removal of large objects like that in some cases. There's an application process. So you're going to look at a lot of sweat and tears getting into a larger urban ag revitalization project. To your first question about can I tear up my front yard this morning, in any agricultural endeavors in an urban environment, your first item on your to-do list is to do a soil test. Two types of soil tests. First, you would want to do a nutrient test to find out how the soil can feed your plants and what you need to do to grow the soil so that your soil can grow your plants. And also, probably most importantly, do a soil lead test. Both of those things are something that Extension Office, Penn State Extension, Allegheny County can help you with. I think that they're both very inexpensive. Nutrient test is something like $9, and the soil test is $10 for lead. And the reason you're wanting to investigate lead is because we have an industrial past here in Pittsburgh, and the soil has been used for so many purposes. So even if your home is a yard and has always been a yard, what you have to remember is 100 years ago, we had so much particulate matter and just poison spewing out of the factories that you need to do that soil lead test. And one thing to demystify about soil lead levels is that a lot of people think that they'll poison themselves through eating the vegetables that they've grown in lead-contaminated soil, but the real danger is from the activity of disturbing the soil. So much like we see problems when people are removing asbestos from buildings and say, well, as long as the asbestos is intact, it won't harm you. Same thing with lead soil. As soon as that soil is, dug with and you're breathing it, getting it on your clothes and your hands, that's where the lead contamination danger comes into effect. So call Extension and we'll help you.
That sounds like very sound advice. We're talking with Heather Mikulus. She's program manager in local food infrastructure and agricultural entrepreneurship for the Penn State University Extension Office in Allegheny County. If you have a comment or question, would like to join the conversation, 412-246-2002 is the number to call. Our email address is esspth